All right, in this next lesson, we're going to talk about positioning materials. Now, this is something you've probably seen me do a handful of times already during these lessons, but I kind of want to take a step back and really dive into what exactly is happening. So let's take a look. We'll just grab another fabric. We'll grab the same synthetic eco French terry cloth thing, and I'll drag and drop it onto the object. Now the question is, what actually is happening when I do that? So by default, and we'll jump into the 2D view here, you'll see that that material file is being laid across the object in a pretty straightforward way. It's just being plopped on top of the UV map in a 0 to 1 space. So you'll see like, wait a second, I thought that these were vertical. Why are the V's kind of horizontal? It's because in the UV map, it's rotated the other way. So if I needed to rotate it, I could just take this and rotate it around. And I can hold down Shift to lock it to 45-degree angles, or I could go down in here into the properties panel, and I can control the rotation this way as well. It's really however you'd like to do that, whatever makes the most sense for you. And so for each one of these, it's controlling that. Now, one of the things that can happen is with this particular texture set, we've got a difficult thing that happens with spheres. So you can imagine when you're unwrapping something that you get kind of this pinch point at the top. And the way that was settled for this one was to actually break off the cap and make a different UV set with that. Well, in reality, what happens is like that doesn't look super great in some situations, especially with like a pattern. So if I had like this fabric pattern on top, you can see that it's not going to line up. And it's really going to create some issues. And even with something like like that concrete that I used before, you can see that it's not going to look great. So how do we get around that? Well, if you look here, we have different projection methods that allow us to do different things. And again, like by default, you plop this on. You can rotate it around. You can, and you saw me add tiling. All tiling is doing is just scaling this down. And what happens is now all of our textures that have been created by default inside of the asset library are tileable, meaning that they'll repeat seamlessly over the object. So you can either, I could either pull this down, or I can take this and say, actually, I scaled it not uniformly. Let me scale it uniformly. I could take it down to a 0.1, which would make it much bigger, or I can say 10, which would bring it down by a size there, by make it like repeat 10 times over a single UV map. But let's say, you know what? Forget those UVs. I don't like them. I don't want to use them. I don't like this little skull cap thing that's happening up here. I want to do something else. Well, Substance Painter has a really great functionality that I absolutely love and utilize all the time. And it's the reason why I can get away with automatically unwrapping my UVs often, because as you can see, where UV seams get together, they can cause some problems. And that is this triplanar projection. So let's see what's actually happening here. So if I switch that, you can see, oh wow, look, that went away. And look at this. Everything's kind of facing the right way. This is amazing. What's happening here? What is this witchcraft? So basically what this is doing, and if you look at the UV map, I've now lost my control in here. And it's because this method of projection doesn't care about your UV map. It does something else. And you have this new slider, hardness, which will help us illuminate what's going on. So you can see now that there are these lines around it. And there's this box around our object here. Now I can move this box around, and you can start to see what's going on. Now, if I slide it this way, you'll see that the front doesn't change. And that's because what this is representing is a projection. So all of these textures are being projected from different angles. And if I slide it this way, you can see that that one doesn't change. Now, what you want to be able, and what I can also do is rotate this around. And what's happening is inside of Substance Painter, we're projecting that material onto the object from multiple different ways. And then by default, what ends up happening is you take that and you actually blur the edges a little bit. And by doing that, now it creates a feeling of a tiling texture, which is really, really, really great. Now, it doesn't always work well, especially with like, so here's the thing, with like patterns, like if I have this fabric pattern on here and I want to do triplanar with this, you'll see immediately why, because it kind of blends between them. But the cool thing is that if you're doing fabric and you're doing like clothing, there's going to be natural seams in your clothes, like where things come together and like around the sleeves and stuff. All you would have to do is make your UV edges at those same points. And if you're using Browswear or Clo or something from the fashion industry, it already does that. So you don't have to worry anything about that. So it's really going to behave much more naturally. But this, for like more organic materials, this triplanar projection works really, really, really well. It also will do a good job of scaling too. So like it will, because it creates a bounding box around the object, it'll actually project on that object from just that area. So it's really, really cool. Oh, you'll see me interacting with this widget here. This widget, I can either control, I've got the controls up here for it. So I can either, translate it, rotate it, or scale it, hitting those buttons. Or I can use the same hotkeys you would find in Maya or most other 3D applications, which is just following the QWERTY letters. So you just do W to translate, W as in warthog, E as in earthworm, and R as in Rhode Island for scaling. So W-E-R. We'll switch between those three methods. All right, cool. So that's a big one. You can also do things like, and these are, you can do cylindrical, you can do spherical mapping, which is the same basic idea, but it just creates a sphere around the object, which actually works pretty well for the sphere itself, but kind of breaks down on the shoes a little bit. It'll cause some stretching there. But this works really well on any, like generally round shaped objects. Cylindrical mapping, same basic idea, but just in a cylinder shape. And you have control over that. And another big one is the planar projection. I'll actually show you that with something else. So I'm going to go back to triplanar here. And then for another layer, like let's say we want to add a logo onto the side of this. So for that, I'm just going to go into our texture library here. Is this the alphas or textures? I was getting mixed up. This is our alphas. And let's say I wanted to just grab a old Substance logo. Actually, I think it's in here. Substance. We have a lot of things called Substance, I guess. Call it a logo. There it is. Okay, so let's say I wanted to project this onto the side here. What I could do is I can create a fill layer. Let's just go ahead and make it red. Add a black mask, add a fill to it. Drag and drop this logo in here. And you can see what the heck is happening here. So same thing as was happening when we applied it, because this is now a new layer, and by default a UV projection, which means the Substance logo gets plopped right on top there. So what I can do is I can take this in the UV space and I can, go into the map. See, I talked about this in the last one. So now this is me scaling the actual color, not the mask itself. So just be careful with that. So we go and scale this down. Oh, wait, what is happening? Again, by default, everything is repeat because it expects a tiling texture. Don't worry about it. If you need to turn it off, just turn it off. And then I can rotate this around and position this on the object where I need to. Now you can see that this is projecting. It's kind of like warping onto the object you would expect if it was like a packaged good, right? Like if it was like if it was printed on the side and wrapped around, you'd get this kind of warping on it. And again, I can go through and adjust this and change all the colors and the roughness and whatever I need to. And then the other component of it too is like, let's say I didn't want that to be warped like that. What I could do instead is go into this fill and say, you know what, I don't want it to be a UV projection. I actually want it to be a planar projection. What does that do? So first thing, it disappears or kind of gets a little bit janky. It's because I had tiled it previously and I changed it around previously. So just make sure you reset the offsets and all that stuff so it's in the right spot. And actually we'll change the rotation too. Okay, so we're back to having a box around our object. So let's move it up. And let's say I want to just kind of plop it here on the side. What you can do is that I can take this and rotate it around to the side and then scale it down and move this box into place. And now it's less warped and more just like projected on. So what exactly is happening? What this methodology is doing is it's similar to the triplanar, but instead of projecting it from multiple angles, it's projecting it from like one, just a plane. So if I let's say I wanted it kind of on the edge up here, and I wanted to position this here, but you can see that since it's projecting from the side, it gets like super janky warped. I can then rotate this, and now it's projecting in from this side, from this like 45-degree angle. So that's pretty cool, right? Okay, one other application method too that you can apply is I can take this same thing, and instead of creating a fill layer, blah, 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 adding this to the mask, we've actually created a shortcut for that with another masking operation called warp masking. And this is the newest one. So if I take this and I just drag and drop it onto the ball man here, I'm gonna get some options. I can either say I want to add this as a map to the base color, which would look like that, or which is the more common one. So adding it to the base color works really well for like, if I had a colored thing and I wanted to add that in here, and then I can just rotate this around, and then I've got like almost like a sticker around there, right? But where the other one works well is where the mask works well is if I don't, like this isn't a color and I want to use this to drive the information, I can drag this on and say, don't do it as a base color, do it as the mask. And what do we know about the mask? It's a black and white image. Do the thing in the white area, don't do the thing in the black area. And now I've got this on top of the object, and I can go in now and say like, okay, cool, let's make this blue, and we'll make it kind of a cool purple color, make it metallic, no roughness, and we'll go ahead and give it a little bit of height too. Awesome. So what happens with this warp projection? Well, this one, by default, again, you have these same controls up here. I can either slide it around, or I can rotate it as I was doing, or scaling it. But one thing to note about this is that it's kind of just like doing it on a plane. So if I took this and I moved it away, you can see it disappears. And that's because by default, when you're moving it, you're moving it in the 3D space regardless of the object. If you wanted to stick to the object, you just use this little surface tool, and now when I slide it around, it sticks to it, which is really cool. So again, it all depends on what you're trying to create with this. So it's like if you want to, if you're doing some like fabric stuff and you need it, or you're doing some labeling for packaging and you need it to wrap around, I would recommend sticking with the UV projection on it. If you wanted to, like apply it to a specific spot, then I would either use the warp projection or the planar projection. The other cool thing about the warp projection too is that you get this grid, and I can, and like I said earlier, this bar changes depending on what I'm working with. So when I switch into the warp projection mode, I get this one, which allows me to say, okay, cool, let's go here, and I can actually change this grid amount, and then I can go here and say edit the vertices, and now I can push and pull if I want to like warp something in the middle here. So pretty cool stuff if I want to create like something a little more warbly like that. So you got some good control over it. So pretty fun one. But yeah, so that's the basics of working with this box right here. So then again, this and everything I've shown you up until this point is probably, again, I would say 90% of what you're going to be doing in Substance Painter. But you're just going to be doing it again and again and again. Like I said, you're going to start with the base layer, add a new layer on top, assign it to a certain section, project it in a certain way, blah, 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 blah. And you're just going to continue on that path. Everything from here forward is going to be kind of like individual isolated situations type of a thing. But if you've watched up until this point, I would even recommend taking a break right now and just practicing some of the things that we've done, because these are like the core elements of working in Substance Painter. Everything else after this is just like, again, a little bit of Flash and just that extra 10%. But most of the look development that you're going to be doing on your props happens in this video and above.